Thank you, Paul. That was such a lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everyone who's here virtually and here live. Welcome back to your show. We're not live down here yet. We're only virtual right now. So I'm really excited to see a sanctuary full of people. I want to also thank Rabbi Clayton Perkins for having me here and Rabbi Lerner. And I really want to thank Judith Himber for reaching out and finding me after all these years since we've last seen one another. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit more about what's been going on. I know Paul has mentioned some of the highlights, and then I want to share with you some of the things about my experience that link me to my Jewishness, that link me to my whiteness, and about living in the intersection of being both Jewish and white, living in the South at this particular moment in time. So that's my plan. And then we can do questions and answers after the oneg break. So as Paul said, I'm currently the rabbi in Brunswick, Georgia, which is the now notorious, my community, for being the home of where Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down in our streets. Murdered, lynched, many will say, myself included. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of his death. And the state has just declared February 23rd, the day of his killing, Ahmaud Arbery Day. And I'm not really sure what that means, but it's happened. Before I launch into all the things I want to say, I want to notice that there may be an urgency about the conversation about racism and anti-racism in America and in the world. And I want to invite us to just feel that urgency and hold on to it and be okay with it. That these systems that we're talking about have taken over 1,000 years to evolve and will likely take an ongoing, long-term, sustained effort to untangle them. While the idea of being able to do that quickly is compelling, I think it's unrealistic. So, and if the idea of having to keep doing this stuff for a long time all the time is uncomfortable, I just want to invite all of us to welcome the discomfort and learn from it, and to settle in for the long haul of making lasting, permanent cultural change. Because that's the call. And it's not just about today. So the other day I was explaining to someone about my own life and about my own identity. And I said, I grew up in Framingham, going to synagogue at Temple Beth El in Sudbury. And there I was just normal. And then I went to rabbinical school and I did all my learning. And then I came to Atlanta, where I was a rabbi there. And it was the first time that people treated me differently because I was a woman. And that's when I really felt connected to my identity as a female. And then coming down here and doing all this work around racial equity, I'm the only rabbi for about 100 miles in any direction. And so it really forced me to be much more cognizant about my Jewish identity in a way that I haven't been probably since I went to Boston College for my undergrad. And as I said these words out loud to some friends of mine, I realized that the part that I thought was my normal life was probably the part of my life where my most salient identity was the one where I'm white. But I just hadn't seen it yet. The invisibility of it was so pervasive. We're going to come back to that. I just want to let you know that for me, you're getting my very real live process here of learning. You're going through this with me in many, many ways. So when I first heard about Ahmaud Arbery's killing, it was shocking. We didn't know about it here for some time after it had happened, right? He was killed in February, and I don't think we knew about it until April, late March, early April. And there was a lot of people who were making efforts to get that information out. Once I heard, though, I felt a real sense of culpability, that I knew that we lived in a divided world where whatever it was that I might have been doing before to combat racism in my small community, clearly wasn't enough, because I wasn't standing in the streets and screaming about it. And now, looking back at the time before Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, I wonder what else we were doing that was so much more important than fighting for his life and for the lives of all the other people here who are at risk. I came to feel deeply connected with Ahmaud Arbery's mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, who I've had the privilege of praying with outside of the courthouse on many occasions. I'm a mom. I have a 6-year-old. And it's been really painful to imagine the space of losing my own child. I want to pause here a second and let that sit in. I want to sit in this space and think about it and to feel that loss and to recognize what a privilege it is that for those of us here who may present as white to the world, we're probably not thinking so much about that for our kids. And for people who present to the world in other ways, they have to have those talks with their children. And that's really hard, and it's really unfair. Knowing the fear and the possibility of the loss of a child was so great that it really has really driven me through the work that I've been doing, right? That's the place I keep coming back to. I want for my kids' friends what my kid has. I want for everyone what I have as a mother, to not have to be so worried about my child's ability to go running in the street and come home safely. So I also feel really called to share these stories with you, because my hope is that by me talking about it with you, that something will happen between us and amongst us that will then make some change that will prevent somebody else from being harmed and someone else from doing harm in some kind of way. And this is how I feel like I hold myself accountable to Wanda Cooper Jones and to Marcus Arbery and to Ahmaud Arbery, is by talking with you and sharing my story. So after all the news came out and the video came out, if you've seen the video, you know how awful it is. If you've not seen the video, please don't watch it. It's awful. It's awful. There are several of us clergy who were called together for a school committee meeting because the school was trying to figure out how to have these difficult conversations about COVID, right? Remember, this is February, March, April 2020. So the world is shutting down because of COVID, and at the same time we have this tinderbox growing. And the school wanted to talk to the kids. So they invited some clergy together and said, will you help us have these conversations? And they've been doing racial equity training for the last year and a half prior. And as I went through some of their training, we all looked at each other and said, could we have the training? Because we all found ourselves suddenly in the position of being racial equity coaches. And we were not racial equity coaches. We're one rabbi and lots of pastors in my little southeastern community. So we got the trainer. We hired the person who works with the school, and she's been training several clergy. We have about 70 clergy members on our list, which means there's probably another 100 clergy members who are not on our list. Just to paint you a picture of what it's like down here in the South, the synagogue is on one corner, and within a quarter mile of the synagogue, there are 8 churches. It's a lot of churches. The ratio of churches to people is very, very high in Brunswick, Georgia. So after we did our training, we began having these community conversations with people. We call them equity dinners. And we invite people together to have talks about race, about what it looks like, about what it means. And one of the biggest things that we've really learned is that whiteness as a racial identity is largely invisible to people who are white. So there's a lot to do there to learn about what that means. And we're using all these tools of appreciative inquiry. So that was how we got ready. And then it became trial time. And we moved to a place where we stood outside the courthouse every day. And we would sit with people. And we would gather with whoever was there, and we would pray with whoever was there. And we learned a lot about showing up. We learned a lot about bearing the discomfort of hearing somebody else's truth, even when you don't like it. And we learned a lot about love, that really love includes being able to hold a lot of pain. And there's a lot of us now who are much closer after spending weeks and weeks sitting outside of a courtroom, outside of a courthouse, in the rain and in the cold. We don't have snow here, so none of that, don't worry. Even in the sunshine. We're very worried about violence erupting. Because as you've seen around the country in cases like this one, the narrative is white men, human beings who are white, kill a human being who is black. Trial comes, the human beings who are black nearby get really agitated. The trial goes, there's no justice, and the human beings that are black riot, right? And we didn't know what the outcome was going to be of the trial. We still felt like we needed to do everything we could to maintain a peaceful space. And that meant learning how to hold a community container that allowed for everything, including a lot of anger. Which initially, I have to say, I really wanted to like suppress the anger. And then somebody, this friend of mine, Tatiana, pulled me aside one day and she said, she's a woman who's black. She says, there needs to be room for the anger because the anger is real. And if we don't let it out here, it comes out in other places. And so we really had to sort of stretch our capacity to be wonderful stewards of whatever was, as opposed to trying to control and shape everything that went on in that space. We kept hearing narratives. We kept hearing that narrative, right? That there would be violence, there would be violence. We kept hearing that there were outside agitators who were coming. And the truth is that there was one day where the Black Panthers and the Lions of Judah showed up in my town in full tactical gear and like massive rifles. I don't even know what the AK-47s, I guess is what you'd call it. That was intimidating. But other than that, was a lot of people, sometimes 5, sometimes 50, sometimes 100, sitting in a beautiful southern town underneath the live oaks with the Spanish moss draping down, sitting and talking. Sometimes someone would bring food, we would eat, and we would talk, and it was real talk. It was really beautiful. I learned a lot about believing in those narratives, right? The expectation was that human beings who are black and around the world would be violent. And once we heard the narrative that human beings that are black are going to be violent, we believed it really quickly. And I regret that. I regret that. Now, as you know, the trial ended with many guilty verdicts, and I'm sure there'll be an appeal. And I could talk to you for days about all the things that went on in and around that trial. We're actually getting ready right now for the federal trial. Began last week, and they've been doing jury selection this week, and they'll start the information part on Monday. So we're getting ready for the next round. First round was really hard. It was very unnerving because we didn't know what was going to happen. This round is really hard because I think we do know what's going to happen. I think that there'll be a lot of conversations about what it means to be, what racism looks like in excruciating detail. And then people will argue about who's right and who's wrong about that. And I think there are a lot of people here who are going to have a lot of hard feelings hearing about these social norms, cultural mores that may have been acceptable for a long time and they're now being called into question. Now, as I think on my journey and my adventure so far of what I've learned, right? Where does my Judaism fit in? I keep coming back to so many pieces of text that really deeply move me. I think that Shemitah and Shabbat teach us that we need to rest from ideas of supremacy and non-supremacy and subordination. We know in Leviticus, love your neighbor. But if you look a couple verses down, in 1934, it also tells us to love the stranger. Really, we are told so clearly to love everyone. When I think about Shirat Hayam, I think that we know that we can do hard things and that we can be brave. And we can even be not brave and still do hard things, even when we don't even understand what it is that we're doing, but we can do it anyway. I think that these are systems that are set up over time, and there are fights that we have always fought, even within Judaism. And changing these systems happens slowly through relationships. And I think our history teaches that. I think there are dangers in capitalism and the love of things and comfort. And those dangers exact a high spiritual and moral price, which we talk about in the Via Hafta. Numbers tells us that we love God and God loves us. And if we're of God, we should love each other in that way. Breathe. Psalm 150 and 149 and 148 and 147, 146 and 145, because we really have a hard time remembering to Kol haneshama tehallel, right? Let every breath, let every soul praise God. And I think Yalenu, where we say L'taken olam b'malchut shaddai, that we should repair the world to bring about the kingdom of the nurturing presence of God. And that's a constant reminder of what we're supposed to do. And I think that racial justice is an integral piece. In fact, I think all equitable justice is an integral piece of doing that. I think the Shema and the Amidah remind us regularly that we should stand for, we should stand with, we should stand up, but that we should not stand against one another because of our oneness and our unity. And it's a really hard line to walk, to stand up for what you believe in is right without standing against the people who you think are wrong. And the last piece that really has been so salient for me is in Exodus, where we talk about our children's children's children. And so the question I regularly ask myself now is, how do I be a good ancestor for my children's children's children? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about whiteness, and then I'll talk about the intersection, and then we're going to conclude services. And I'll go quickly through this because I know we only have so much time. I recently was reading a piece where a Latin preacher was talking about stereotypes of Latinos, and that the stereotypes that the Latinos had of people who were white. And I sat there and I thought about it for a second. I said, I have no idea what the stereotypes are of white people, which is a sure sign that I'm a white person, because I really had no idea. So I Googled it, because that's what you do when you're a rabbi. You go to Rav Google and you ask the wisdom literature. And I learned all kinds of things. And I've recently actually done some training that really got into depth about what it means to be white, about the identity of the cultural norms around whiteness. And I'm going to just ask you to think for a moment. If you are presenting as white, if you're not presenting as white, right? Not everyone who's Jewish presents as white. We present as a whole rainbow of colors and people. Think about if you know what those stereotypes are. I suspect that the more you're personally marginalized by whiteness, the more you'll know what those stereotypes are, and that's part of how the system works. Is that other people have to be aware, right? People without the power, without the privilege, have to be aware of what the people with the power and the privilege have, and the people with the power and the privilege don't as much. So what I've learned is that here we go. Here's the characteristics of whiteness. I'm wrestling with these a lot these days because I keep running into them. They're everywhere in my life. The sense of urgency. We've got to do it. We've got to do it now. I just said it, right? We've got to be on time, and we've got to stay on time. We've got to fix it now. That we have to know how to do things and do them well, and we have to be confident at it. That we don't fail. We don't let ourselves fail. That we control time and we control appearance. Always put together. We don't like things messy or out of place. We are emotionally subdued and dispassionate. We can be passive aggressive. We're impatient with things being difficult. We want it fixed right away, and we want it to be easy. We have a drive to dominate. and we are ill-equipped with tools, language, or skills for talking about race. So I know that's a lot to absorb, right? So try to get all that in. And I want to talk where these two things come together about Judaism and whiteness as somebody who is both. Human beings who are Jewish come in all pigmentations. Given that a large part of our history moved through Europe, there's a light pigmented majority of Jewish people in America, but they're not the totality. Being an anti-racist is a Jewish issue because we are hurting our own Jewish brothers and sisters when we are ignorant to the white supremacy that is present within our own faith. We as Jews are called to be anti-racist because we're called by God, by our own history, and for all that Jewish tradition I was just sharing with you and more, to be human beings who fight oppression of any and all kinds. We're called to be anti-racist because it's wrong. Racism is wrong. Disequity is wrong. And when you know better, we do better. And because, perhaps most obviously these days, the forces that seek to oppress human beings who have more melanin in their skin, who have darker skin, are the same forces that seek to oppress human beings who are Jewish. It's all tied together in one beautiful interwoven fabric. So, I want to link us back to our Torah portion, and I will conclude. There's this great line that we read this morning, we heard this morning. Vayasita begdei kodesh la'aharon achicha lichvod ulatifaret. Lichvod ulatifaret. Make sacred vestments, make holy clothing, literally, for your brother Aaron, for dignity and adornment. Lichvod ulatifaret. They're beautiful words. Thomas read those words also when he said the blessing at the end of the Haftarah. Honor and dignity. And there, I came across this teaching from Everett Fox, who said that in virtually all traditional religions, such garments are of great importance, often signaling the status of the wearer as representative of the community. An additional function stressed in our account is that the garments somehow reflect God, God's self, through the use of certain colors or materials. That the term glory is used to indicate their function, and that, which is a key term in the book of Exodus, and always it's applied to God, never to Moses, and it signals what's at stake. I think that we are all clothed as human beings in Begdei Kodesh, and that it is our job to wear them l'kavod u'letifaret, with honor and with glory. Whatever that clothing looks like, whatever skin you are in. And I hope that this time together this morning will help all of us move a little further in the conversation as we turn the giant wheel of culture and make this world a little bit better. Thank you, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.